I trained the man who took my job for 6 months, and I thanked them for the chance to do it. I thought I was building someone up. I was actually building the case for my own removal, and I handed them every document they needed. His name was Ethan, 26, eager, quick to learn. My manager asked me to mentor him, and I was proud to be asked. After 24 years, being trusted a pass on what I knew felt like recognition. So I gave him everything. Passwords, Vendeur contact, the processes I'd spent a career refining. What I didn't notice, not at first, was that the training plan covered my entire job. Not the basics a new hire needs. Mine, line by line, the way you'd write instructions for someone who would have to do it without me. I told myself it was good planning. Thorough onboarding. The company being responsible for once. Then I saw the completion date on the checklist. 2 weeks before my performance review. And I started to wonder why a trainee needed to be ready to run my job before anyone had decided I was leaving it. I should explain who I was before any of this started, because it matters to how long I missed what was in front of me. I'd been a senior operations specialist at the same logistics company for 24 years. I knew the systems nobody else wanted to learn. I knew which vendors would answer the phone at 6 in the morning and which ones would let an order sit for a week. When something broke at 2 a.m., the on-call list eventually got to me, and I fixed it. That was my value, and I knew it, and so did everyone above me. So when my manager, Dana, stopped by my desk that spring and asked if I'd take a new hire under my wing, I didn't hesitate. People like me don't get asked to teach because we're expendable. We get asked because we're trusted. His name's Ethan, she said. Sharp kid. I want him to learn from the best. I'll admit it. That landed exactly the way she meant it to. What I noticed, and then talked myself out of noticing, was the plan she handed me. It wasn't a sticky note or a quick conversation. It was a printed onboarding document, formatted, dated with a timeline. And the timeline was aggressive. Most new hires get 6 weeks to learn their corner of the work. This plan covered everything I did. That's a lot of ground for one trainee, I said. We like to be thorough now, Dana said. Just document everything as you go. Ethan should be able to run it without you. I laughed a little when she said it. I thought she meant without me hovering. I think now she meant exactly what she said. I threw myself into it the way I throw myself into everything. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. Ethan was genuinely good. He asked smart questions. He took notes. He stayed late. And because I liked him, and because being needed felt good after a long stretch of feeling invisible, I gave him more than the plan asked for. But the request started to outrun what a trainee should need. He asked for the vendor contact list, the full one, with the direct cell numbers I'd built over 15 years. He asked for the share drive passwords, not just read access. He asked me to walk him through the month-end close, the part of the job that takes a decade to learn and that I had never once been asked to explain to anyone. They told me to learn all of it, he said, almost apologetic when I raised an eyebrow. I'm just doing what's on the list. The list. I went back and actually read it that night, the whole onboarding checklist, top to bottom. It wasn't a training plan. It was my job description, line by line, item for item, the exact language for my own role, the document I'd reviewed at every performance review for 24 years. Someone had taken my job and turned it into a set of instructions for someone else. And at the bottom of the checklist was a target completion date, 2 weeks before my annual review. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did what reasonable people do when something frightens them. I found a way to make it ordinary. Good planning, I told myself. Maybe they were finally building redundancy into a role that had been a single point of failure for years. Maybe this was a compliment. If I was important enough to clone, I was important enough to keep. I even tested the theory out loud. In a hallway, I told Dana I was glad they were finally taking knowledge transfer seriously. Exactly, she said, smiling. It's just smart planning. But when I asked why the timeline was so tight, the smile held and the answer didn't come. She said something about budgets and moved the conversation somewhere else. I noticed the deflection. I chose not to weigh it. Then Ethan said something over lunch that I couldn't put down. We were talking about how fast he'd been hired, and he mentioned easily, with no idea what he was handing me, that the recruiter had told him the role was opening up soon. He'd interviewed in February. I did the math at my desk that afternoon. February. Dana hadn't asked me to mentor anyone until April. They'd hired the person to learn my job 2 months before anyone told me a trainee existed. That was the moment the comfortable explanation died. I stopped telling myself stories and started looking. Quietly. I had a reason to be in our HR system. I'd done light approvals for my own small team for years, and nobody had ever turned that access off. So one evening I looked up how Ethan's hire had been classified. I expected trainee, maybe junior specialist. That's what you'd call someone brought in to learn. His offer record didn't say either. It listed my exact job title. Same title. Same role code. Not junior. Not assistant. Mine. I sat there reading it 3 times to be sure I wasn't inventing it. The hiring manager listed wasn't even Dana. It was someone 2 levels up in a part of the org I rarely dealt with, routed through a workforce function I never had reason to think about. 2 people can't hold the same job title for long. One of them is a plan, and the other one is a placeholder. I already knew which one I was. The next thing I needed to know was whether this was about me, or whether I'd just stumbled into the edge of something bigger. That was harder. Asking around carries a cost. In a company that size, the wrong question to the wrong person becomes he's paranoid, and once that word attaches to you, your competence stops matching. I'd watched it happen to other people, so I was careful. I had one person I trusted, a colleague named Marcus in a different department, 20 years in, the kind of steady you don't find often. Over coffee, away from the building, I asked him a careful question. Had he noticed anything strange about how new people were being brought on? He went quiet. Then he told me his own version of my story. 6 months earlier, he'd been asked to mentor an exceptional new hire. Same flattering language. Same unusually complete training plan. He'd done it gladly, the way I had. Whatever happened to the guy you trained? I asked. Marcus looked at me for a second too long. He's still here, he said. I'm the one who's not, in about 3 weeks. They called it a restructuring. I drove home that night understanding, for the first time, that my fear had been too small. This wasn't happening to me. It was happening through me, and it had happened before. 2 cases could still be coincidence. I needed to know if there was a third. So I started keeping a list. Not accusations, just facts, the kind nobody can argue with. Who had recently been assigned an eager understudy, who had left shortly after. I pulled from things I had legitimate reason to see. Org charts, the all-staff directory, the farewell emails that go out when someone moves on to new opportunities. The trouble was that the cases were scattered. Different departments, different managers, different stated reasons. Restructuring here, a performance issue there, an early retirement somewhere else. Nothing connected them on the surface. That's exactly why no one had noticed. But when I lined them up by date, the shape appeared. At least 3 long-tenured employees, each one assigned a promising trainee. Each one exited within a couple of months of that training wrapping up. Marcus, the woman in procurement who'd been there 18 years. A man in IT operations who'd trained his own backfill and was gone by the next quarter. I kept the list deliberately dull. No theories, no arrows connecting names, nothing that would look like a campaign if anyone ever saw it. Just a column of facts I could defend one at a time. A name, a start date for the trainee, a departure date for the veteran, the stated reason in the company's own words. I figured if any single line could be argued away, the column as a whole still couldn't. And there was one more thing they had in common, the thing that turned my stomach. Every single one of them had been near the top of their pay scale. Not coasting, not underperforming. The procurement woman had won an internal award 2 years running. The IT operations man held a certification only 2 people in the building had. These weren't people the company was quietly correcting. They were people the company could no longer afford to keep being good. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't drama. It was a cold, quiet click, the sound of unrelated things becoming one thing. I wasn't looking at bad luck. I was looking at a process. And processes have authors. I needed to understand the mechanism. Not who to blame, not yet. How it actually worked. Because there was no memo with my name on it telling people to replace me. I'd looked. That's not how these things leave fingerprints. What I found instead was language. On a shared planning drive, in a folder I had access to only because of an old project that had never been cleaned up, there was a workforce planning deck. Slide after slide of neutral, bloodless phrasing. And two terms kept appearing on the same slides, paired like they belonged together. Succession readiness and cost optimization. Separately, both are ordinary. Every company plans for people leaving. Every company watches costs. But these slides put them in the same sentence, over and over. Build succession readiness in high-cost roles. Optimize cost through planned transition. Reduce key person dependency. Reduce key person dependency. That was me. That had always been my value. And here it was rewritten as a risk to be managed down. I scrolled to a chart that listed roles by status. And there, in a row near the middle, was my position. Status, transition in progress. Nobody had told me my own job was in transition. The deck had known before I did. By then I could see the shape, but I still didn't understand the why, and I refused to fill that gap with a villain. I'd worked there too long to believe in evil. I'd seen how decisions really get made, in conference rooms full of tired people chasing a number someone above them demanded. So I followed the incentive instead of the person. It didn't take long once I knew what I was looking at. The company had spent years quietly carrying a heavy cost. A generation of long-tenured employees with senior salaries, accrued benefits, and pensions that grew more expensive every year we stayed. We weren't a problem because we were bad at our jobs. We were a problem because we were good at them for a long time, and loyalty had a price tag. Replacing one of us with someone 20 years younger didn't just swap a face. It cut his salary nearly in half, reset the benefit clock, and erased a pension liability the company would otherwise carry for decades. And you couldn't simply fire us. People with our tenure, our reviews, our records would have had every reason to ask hard questions. But if the knowledge walked out the door with us, the lights would go off. Customers would notice. Things would break at 2 a.m. with no one left who knew the fix. Unless, of course, someone had already been trained to keep the lights on. That was what the mentoring was for. We weren't teaching successors. We were removing the only reason they couldn't let us go. I found a projected savings figure on the second-to-last slide. A single number presented as a win, the kind of figure that gets someone a good quarter and a nod from the people they answer to. Then I matched it against the people who'd already left. The numbers lined up almost exactly. Every departure I'd quietly logged had a dollar value, and the deck had been counting them before they happened. It was the before they happened part that stayed with me. The savings weren't a result anyone was reporting after the fact. They were forecast, which meant the departures weren't accidents the company had benefited from. They were line items it had planned for and was now executing, one tenure name at a time. I had the picture now. What I didn't have yet was certainty I could stand behind, and I knew the difference mattered. Because here's the thing about 24 years. They make you want to be wrong. I kept looking for the innocent version, the reading where this was clumsy planning and not what it looked like. I owed the place that much, or thought I did. So I did the most boring, most powerful thing I could. I built a timeline and let the dates speak. Hire dates of the trainees. Start dates of the mentoring assignments. The completion dates on the training plans. The departure dates of the people who'd left. I laid them in a single column, in order, for every case, including my own. They didn't just correlate. They interlocked. In every case, the trainee was hired first. The mentoring was assigned second. the training completed, and then, within weeks, the experienced employee was gone. Same sequence, same spacing, case after case. My own row was 3/4 complete and pointing exactly where the others had ended. Coincidence makes a mess. This was clean. This was designed. And then, as if the timeline needed a final stamp, a meeting invite landed in my calendar. Dana and someone from HR I'd never met. The subject line was gentle and terrible. Let's discuss your transition. There was that word again, the one from the deck. They'd stopped being careful enough to hide it. I went into that meeting calmer than I'd been in months, because certainty is calmer than suspicion. I wasn't going to accuse anyone. I'd learned, watching others, that accusation is how they make it about your behavior instead of their decision. I just wanted to hear what they'd say and to watch which words they reached for. Dana did most of the talking. She used the phrase natural career evolution. She talked about the company investing in the future and thinking about sustainability. Not once did she say the word performance. Not once did she point to anything I'd done wrong, because there was nothing to point to, and we both knew it. I asked one question, evenly. Is this related to cost? There was a pause. The HR person said, carefully, that compensation structure is always one factor in long-term planning. That was the whole story in a single sentence, said out loud, dressed up enough that they probably thought it was a denial. They never denied anything. They justified, and justification is its own kind of confession. I thanked them and left. What they didn't know was I'd spent the previous week quietly doing exactly what they'd asked me to do at the start, documenting everything, including my own training logs, every hour I'd spent teaching Ethan my job, all of it dated, all of it matching their deck. I had a decision to make, and revenge was never really on the table. I didn't want anyone destroyed. I wanted the truth to exist somewhere it couldn't be quietly deleted. So I didn't blow anything up. I did something slower and harder to dismiss. I took what I'd assembled, the deck language, the timeline, the matching dates across multiple people, and I raised it through the one-channel bill to look at exactly this kind of thing. Not as a grievance about me, as a question about a pattern. I framed it the way the evidence demanded. I wasn't claiming a conspiracy. I was pointing at a repeating sequence that appeared to route experienced, high-cost employees out of the company under cover of training, in a way that sidestepped the fair process protections those decisions were supposed to have. For a few weeks, nothing visible happened, and I assumed nothing would. That's the part they count on, that you'll lose your nerve in the silence. Then the silence ended. An internal review opened, quietly the way these things do. People I'd never spoken to started pulling the same records I had. And because the pattern was real, it held up under eyes far more official than mine. The review confirmed what the timeline had told me. A recurring train and replace sequence, concentrated in senior, high-cost roles that had bypassed the safeguards meant to govern restructuring and exits. I won't pretend I felt triumphant. What I felt, mostly, was the strange relief of being believed. For months, I'd carried the quiet fear that I was imagining it, that I'd become the paranoid man in the hallway. The review was the moment the company itself admitted I hadn't. Leadership announced corrective measures, a review of recent senior exits, new oversight on the line between mentoring and succession, the careful, bloodless language of an organization that has been caught and intends to be more careful next time. What happened after is the part one think about most, because it's where I had to decide who I wanted to be. The policies actually changed, and not just on paper. Mentoring got formally separated from succession planning, so that teaching someone could never again be quietly converted into staffing your own replacement. Exit decisions for long-tenured staff gained a layer of review that hadn't existed before. None of it undid what had already happened to Marcus or to the others, but made the next version of us harder to erase. As for me, I stayed for a while on different terms, with my eyes open in a way they hadn't been before. Then I left when I chose to, on a date I picked, which turned out to matter more to me than I expected. The hardest conversation wasn't with Dana. It was with Ethan. Because here's the truth I had to make peace with. Ethan wasn't a villain. He was a kid who'd been hired into a role he didn't understand the cost of, told to learn everything, doing exactly what he was asked. He had no idea he'd been the instrument. When he finally understood what the training had really been, he was shaken, and he came to me and he apologized for something that was never his to apologize for. I told him the truth, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that the only thing he was guilty of was being trusted by people who weren't honest with either of us. I'm in it. Staying angry at Ethan would have been like staying angry at the wrench. The person I had the hardest time forgiving was myself. Because the thing I keep coming back to, the lesson I can't put down, is how willingly I did it. Nobody forced me. They didn't trick me with anything clever. They just asked me to teach and called it trust, and I wanted so badly to be trusted that I never asked the obvious question. That was the design, not cruelty, flattery. They didn't need to take my knowledge. They knew that if they made me feel valued enough, I'd hand it over myself, gift-wrapped on a timeline with a smile. I trained my own replacement for 6 months, and the reason I never saw it was that being needed felt too good to question. I question things now. I still teach people when they ask, because the knowledge matters more than my pride about it. But I read the plan first, all of it. And when something is too flattering to make sense, I've learned to ask the quiet question I should have asked that spring. Why me? Why now? And who decided this before I knew there was anything to decide? The peace I found wasn't in winning. It was in finally being able to trust myself to see clearly, even when seeing clearly cost something that turned out to be worth more than the job ever was.